Hi, good afternoon, everyone. We're just going to wait a couple minutes before we get started. I can see the participant numbers jumping, and once it kind of levels off, we will begin the program. It's good to see so many people coming out for this. As we mentioned in the publicity for the program, we are recording it so you can view it later or share it with colleagues later. Why don't you go ahead and get started? Hi, welcome. James Wilkinson. I'm the CEO at ACHA, and this is the first of what we hope to be annual town hall report on our DEIJA activities to update you, the members, about what your association is doing, what the DEIJA committee is doing, steps we're taking along our journey, and continuing to take on that journey. This was really brought to light last fall during the member survey because we realized there was a real call for transparency, and we realized that while we had taken a lot of actions, it wasn't sinking through, the messages weren't getting out to members. And so that's kind of the genesis of this, along with part of the strategic plan, is to have this annually. My co-presenters today are the consultant we've been using in the DEIJA space, Roger Moreno, Director of Strategy and Innovation at MSM Global.
Hi, folks. Great to be here with you today. Again, Roger Moriano. I've with MSM Global, and we've been working with ACHA since last summer, so it's good to be with you all today.
Thank you, Roger. And then joining us also is Padma Enswa. She is chair of the DEIJA committee, so obviously she is an ACHA member at Columbia University. Padma?
Hi, everyone. Good to be here with you all. Thank you for joining us.
So with that, I'll start my presentation, and you should be able to view me in the corner. We will take Q&A at the end. I'm going to let you know right now, I'm going to go fairly quickly through my portion because I really want you to hear from Roger and Padma. But you really need to see what the background is, where we have been. So I'm going to start with the history of where we've been as an organization, steps we've taken. Then I'm going to go into our strategic plan. It will slow there, but there's a lot of actions that are related to the plan that you need to know about. Then I'm going to turn it over to Roger Moriano, and he'll talk about the consultants' assessment and their findings. And then Padma will take it, be the final speaker. She'll talk about the takeaways from the member survey that I mentioned, as well as the next steps for the DEIJA committee and for ACHA. And then question and answer with the members. And now when we get to that, there's a question and answer option at your toolbar at the bottom. So we hope that you take advantage of that so we can have a meaningful Q&A. So let me get started and jump on by sharing screen. Okay, so I just went over the agenda for today, so I'll click and there we go. Town hall. So this is my portion, obviously. Let's talk history here. Where do we start? So I looked, and in talking with staff who've been here a lot longer than I've been here, and long-term members, this is what we kind of pointed out. There might be elements missing, but I just want to, like I said, go through quickly. These are the biggest ones that I found. The earliest evidence I can see is from 2007, when the Allies for LGBT Coalition was launched, and it still exists today as the LGBTQ plus coalition. Kind of a gap then, 2013, the board put out a position statement on marriage equality. That was a watershed moment for this organization. There was a lot of tension among and by members about this, but the organization went out with a statement on marriage equality. It was a very important national debate at the time, really lifting our head out of the kind of the silos and the campus-focused things to really address a societal question. Big moment for the organization. 2019 then, so these kind of gaps you see continue. 2019, we launched our HBCU coalition. So that was a big one. That was under my predecessor in this seat, Devin Jopp. And also the board reaffirmed the non-discrimination policy. But what I wasn't able to find in my research was when did we initially launch that non-discrimination policy? So I just want to point out as a reaffirmation in 2019. 2020, things, as we know, nationally really heated up. We at ACHA, the board created the Racial Marginalization and Health Inequities Task Force. So that's the RMHI task force, and you'll hear quite a bit about them. They're charged with, among other things, creating resources for members, making recommendations for improving at that time DEI at ACHA, and serving as experts and advisors on DEI topics, both to the board and to members. The board came out with several statements that year: racial marginalization and health equity statement, one on access to gender affirming care for your transgender students, and also an anti-bias, anti-violence statement. And last, in the fall of that year, there was a health equities 2-day virtual summit that was held. Forward to 2021, the RMHI report submitted their, the RMHI task force submitted their report to the board, and that was in the spring or summer. I came aboard in the summer of 21, and one of my first tasks was to help the board direct a response. Those are now both available on the ACHA website. So when this is slides are made available along with this recording, you'll be able to click through. So I've included a ton of links here in this in the presentation for that purpose. One of the first initiatives I undertook was that all ACHA staff here in the national office must complete the DEI workplace certificate, and they all were able to do so by the end of 2021. And now we currently have as a policy, all new staff must complete the same certificate. This is the University of South Florida within 6 months of their starting time at ACHA. So I mentioned that RMHI report. I'm gonna dig a little deeper. There's 3 immediate outcomes that I wanted to convey to you. The annual meeting, when you submit a poster or a session, it's now de-identified so that people who are reviewing it are not looking at a name, they're looking at content only. We also updated some of the demographic questions so that when the program planning committee looks at a whole, they can make sure that they're getting presenters that represent a good cross-section of the entire ACHA membership. We have a document called the DEI Programming Guidance. And so what that is for the presenters as they're formulating their presentation, and it's given to them again before they make their presentation at the annual meeting. But it also guides the annual meeting program planning committee. So the RMHI task force updated that programming guidance document. The other thing that I worked with under ACHA president at the time, Scott Timms, was the president gives every year charges to all the committees and task forces. That's what they're supposed to work, what they're supposed to work on in the next program year. We built into those and into the guidance that we give to our coalitions and sections a whole paragraph that now exists on every time you get the charges, every time the chairs are given the charges for their committee, task force, or what we call guidance for coalitions and sections. There's a thing in there, DEI values, restating the DEI values, and directing the work of the volunteer groups to include these values and show how these values are included in the work that they achieve. If it's a written product, for example, if it's webinars or education, whatever they're doing that needs to be foremost in what they do. So in 2022, then, there was we have 4 at-large directors, the way the board of directors is currently structured. We already had directors. There's 4 at-large directors. One was was the research, the board liaison to the research committees. One is a board liaison to the education committees, and one was board liaison for advocacy activities. That really left a spot and a screaming need for having the 4th of those 4 at-large directors be dedicated to the DEIJA committee and others working in that space across the organization. So they're the voice of DEIJA on the board. They're a liaison to the committees that work on DEIJA activities, and they're part of and review the program planning committee's work to make sure that we have DEIJA represented across the committee. Now you'll notice the shift from DEI to DEIJA. This is because in 2022, we undertook our strategic planning process at the board level. That's a year-long process. And during that process, we expanded from DEI to DEIJA, adding justice and accessibility to the existing diversity, equity, and inclusion elements. So we broadened it during the 2022. Not a separate bullet point, but I think you get where I'm going with it. We also expanded the guidance given to annual meeting presenters, not just to consider DEI in their presentation or DEIJA in their presentation, but to intentionally consider social determinants and health disparities when they're creating their submission and presenting at the annual meeting. We created a land acknowledgement statement that's on the website now, and it's also read aloud at the annual meeting. If you haven't picked up on this, AM is annual meeting. Sorry, it fits a little better. It's quicker. We also established affinity group meetings at the annual meeting. We also had a board statement on the overturn of Roe versus Wade because that has a disparate impact on marginalized groups and those less economic resources. even more in 2022. The inaugural HBCU Health Summit was funded. So I want to give credit where credit is due. The HBCU Coalition suggested it in the fall. It fit right into the strategic plan as the strategic plan was coming together to be finalized. So you can't say that the board or me came up with it, but we were attuned to what's needed of the organization, and HBCU Coalition came to us and said this is what they want. So I made sure it was fully funded right out of the gate, and that's what was there for spring of 23. The RMHI task force, we talk about systems and structures, right? That task force we made permanent. Now it's a committee. The reproductive rights task force was launched after the Dobbs decision in June. And the foundation, through a grant through Aetna, had a well-being survey. And the final report from that survey, that it really took place in 21, but the final report was published in 22. And that's why I bolded this. Perception of institutional support for diversity is the strongest predictor of emotional well-being among students, faculty, and staff. Just a huge finding, very important for the organization to seize on that and reaffirm why we think DEIJA are so important for us and for our members and for our students that we serve. In January 2023, the board adopted the new ACHA strategic plan around the theme, health and well-being are foundational for student success. I don't think anybody here would disagree with it. That's based on, it's a year-long process to get to that point. So that's the central theme. I'm going to go dig deep now into the strategic plan. Again, it's going to be faster than some of you might like. You can always come back and look at it later. But the plan is very comprehensive. And DEIJA is the first pillar of the 4 pillars of the ACHA strategic plan. The goal is to grow diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and accessibility in the field of college health and well-being and on campuses. So it's a very broad definition and a very ambitious scope. Okay, so the 2023 plan, this is it in a nutshell. When I say the 4 pillars, obviously there's 4 pieces going across. And if you look in the background, there's an arrow, right? So that's showing the progress that we want to make. The first one is to the left, committing to diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and accessibility, and an evolving approach for continued support of DEIJA in college health and well-being. This one up to the far right, I just want to include because it's blued out for a reason. Those are the 4 pillars. The 5th is focusing on how we're going to deliver. Evolving research, education, networking, and advocacy. And I think you can see and you will see that we are doing the DEI work and the other 3 pieces across all of those activity areas. Okay, so how are we going to grow diversity, equity, inclusion, DEIJA in the field and on campuses? When I say there's a roadmap and there's a detailed plan, all of those orange boxes on the previous slide have a 3-year plan associated with them. Okay, and so this is the one for DEIJA. You can see the ones that we've done basically are in bold. I've highlighted the ones I'm going to talk about. 23, and now 24 is underway. So I'm going to go through these. So again, a little faster than I would like, but again, I'm just mindful of the time. We developed a board values statement in 2023 that appears on the website. A member code of conduct. What we had before was an ethics code, and we still have that. That really regulates behavior between that patient to practitioner behavior. The code of conduct is how do we as members interact with one another? One of the findings from the survey was that a lot of the complaints or issues people have with the organization happen in the ACHA context, but without a member code of conduct, there's no way for ACHA to really do anything. And so now we've got a code of conduct that the ethics committee put together, and that appears on every page of the ACHA website. At the bottom of on the footer, you can get to it from every page where the code of conduct is. Does that make sense? There's a link to the code of conduct at the bottom in the footer of every page on the website. This annual meeting sessions I talked about. I wanted to highlight this one for you, community engagement group. So we're going to Atlanta this year. We're going to New Orleans next year for the annual meeting. People have real concerns about the policy atmosphere in those areas of the country, whether it's reproductive rights under attack, assaults on LGBTQ rights, etc. We've engaged the community at the annual meeting with schools from Georgia as well as the DEIJA committee for proactive activities at the annual meeting. So there'll be a lot of details about that coming out more closer to the annual meeting. But that's just to let you know that that's a real big piece of it because there's a huge amount of concerns around those locations. I mentioned the RMHI committee, and now it's changed names again. Now it's the DEIJA committee. That's what Padma Ensua is the chair of. I mentioned the survey. That was the first, and we want to do this annually, right? How are people feeling about it? How can we judge our progress? And the DEIJA committee is going to be working on that and developing the survey, refining the survey, and then developing a report card annually to come out of it. In 2023, I mentioned the HBCU Health Summit. That was the inaugural one. Then we fully funded the number one for 2024. That's coming up in a few weeks, and I'm honored to be speaking at that. We also established a community college coalition. Obviously, that's a huge area of in terms of health equities, a lot of different health and basic needs concerns at the community college level. But that was huge because those are a lot of times marginalized groups, historically under-resourced populations, as well as part-time students. It's a very different population set. In 2024, we've already done volunteer, we're going to conduct volunteer leader training at the annual meeting. This is for all the chairs of all of our sections, task force committees, et cetera. So we're expanding, not just staff getting training, board getting training. Now we're also getting our volunteer leaders. So these circles are expanding. The community engagement group activities, I've talked about that already. The baseline progress report, we still have to develop the report, but this is the first of, this is kind of the oral section of the report. And then the town hall meeting is what you're at right now. So thank you for being at the inaugural town hall meeting on this. We're going to do the second survey in the fall. The new website. So one of the challenges with the website, again, I included all these links because I found it, even for me, and now I've been here 2.5 years, it's hard to find stuff on the website. The new website is going to feature DEIJA intentionality, not just in the pictures and things like that, but how you can find the DEIJA materials and resources for yourself, our statements, our the reports themselves, the well-being report, et cetera, making everything on the website easier to access and making sure that we're showing clearly on the website what are the pathways to leadership opportunities within this organization. There are multiple pathways. We have to capture them. We're also going to have a small marketing campaign called Share Your Story so people can actually share their stories on their leadership journeys within ACHA. I mentioned the HBCU Health Summit, so this is going to be the second iteration. And there is a special issue of JACH under preparation focusing on HBCU. So we're really excited about that too. And that's going to be, the guest editor there is Dr. Chandra Moore, who actually was pivotal in creating the HBCU Health Summit. I also want to give credit to Dr. Marie Ross Alexander, who was the chair of your advocacy committee. I'm not going to read through all of these, but 5 major statements that I would characterize as falling under the DEIJA area in 2023. Just a ton of work that she and that committee have done. And okay, I'm going to pause there and I'm going to shoot right through to the end because there's basically that same kind of roadmap that shows the 3-year layout for each of those orange boxes. Don't have time to go through with them. That's a full strategic plan review, but I just really want to obviously focus on DEIJA today. This is the whole structure of ACHA. So you can see why it's overwhelming to new members. We have sections, right? Your professional discipline. You've got standing committees that are defined in the bylaws. You've got what we call board advisory committees, any committees that the board has formed, like that are going on an ongoing basis. Task forces, we have 9 of those that are active at the moment. Coalitions, and then 11 affiliates. It is a huge and complex organization. But when I say we want to build DEIJA intentionality into the DNA of all of our activities, this is what I mean. All of those committees, advisories, and task forces have as either the primary or secondary focus DEIJA. If it's primary, it's bold and yellow. That means they're working on something actively. If it's bold, just bold, that means it's like I said since 2021, we built that in there as one of the charges. Is that they need to, when they undertake their activities, that they need to build DEIJA intentionality into them. The other ones are working on more specific activities that are defined in the other charges for each committee. So it is a broad swath. Okay, sections, coalitions, affiliates, they don't get charges per se, they get guidance from us, and it is in each of those guidance statements as well. So we say across the organization, this is what we mean. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. Again, I know that was really fast, but I think there's a lot of good stuff happening, particularly in the last 2 or 3 years, and a lot of people behind it, and the organizational commitment behind it, and the board commitment behind it. And most importantly, budgetary commitment is behind each and every one of these initiatives. So with that, I will pause. Roger Moreno is going to start again, and he can give you a little bit of framing around the assessment that his group has done and some of the findings of their report that came to the board last fall. Roger?
Thanks, James. And clearly, you see a lot of the initiatives that are already, taking place. And I think a lot of the initiatives that we see already in place were already there before we arrived on the scene last summer. So it's been good to see these happening. And in addition to that, what we came up with in the assessment work that we did this summer and in the early fall, which included a survey that was completed by about 240 or so participants, which was great to see. We had some focus groups as well. I suspect some folks who were engaged in the survey might be here today as well. So if you were, thank you so much. That feedback was valuable for us to really put together a report that, as you see here, we presented to the board just a couple of months ago, and which really kind of reiterated some of the things that James said in terms of some of the needs. And so one thing that we reminded the board, and what I would say today, the results of the assessment are something that I think will be made available in its entirety on the website, but this is just a snapshot of what we came up with. And anytime you interpret results, it's to really bring deep curiosity to the results, to what's being said, to really pay attention to the strengths as well as the challenges, because we can have a tendency to engage in wrong spotting, which is really getting into the weeds in terms of the challenges and not paying attention to enough of the strengths that are happening. So let's be mindful of that, and to give time to give time to reflect and to process the information, and to really understand that this is a long game. Too many folks and too many organizations engage in DEI work as a quick fix, as a one shot, a one off, and then be done with it. And really what this type of initiative needs is a long, sustained effort with a lot of people being involved and a lot of people feeling heard. So it's important to remember that. So some of the strengths that came out here in the survey included folks telling us that there was a strong commitment in language to DEIJA, and respondents felt like they appreciated the efforts that ACHA has been making. Some of the quotes that we pulled out included some folks saying, I think there are a lot of people working towards fostering DEIJA community through an intersectional lens. I have seen their determination to change the current culture to add ACHA. And then another person commented that I feel as though ACHA makes a concerted effort to address DEIJA and its initiatives and membership to best address the needs of a diverse student population. So some good feedback there. And we pulled out a little bit more as we got into some of the strengths. People really feeling like there was a willingness from the organization to really work and improve, to recognize that there was still work to move forward on. One other person saying that I think on paper there's a commitment to doing the work, but there have been shifts in different areas, such as program planning. Being able to make the shifts gives them hope that it can happen in other areas as well. So that's a very positive thing. And acknowledging that this is a worthy discussion and that there's improvement to be made. And so again, people are noticing. They're noticing the efforts from the leadership. They're noticing the efforts among the membership as well. Again, there's additional feedback in terms of some of the positives included folks really commenting on the noticeable improvement or growth of more inclusion in some of the leadership within ACHA, fostering safe spaces for affinity groups to discuss needed topics, really understanding that they've seen an effort to provide public statements when significant social issues have occurred that are impacting members, they're impacting students on college campuses and impacting the work that we engage in. And so really understanding that that's an important factor in terms of how we lead in these turbulent times. And then also reaching out to HBCUs and really getting connected there and to other community colleges, tribal colleges. There's been a real effort to ask who is not at the table, who is not visible, and who haven't we provided an avenue enough of a voice so that we know what their concerns are, because all too often, particularly the small and rural colleges, can be forgotten about in these moments. So real positive steps that are being recognized there. Moving into some of the challenges, a lot of this, in our estimation, is rooted in practices that perhaps have been longstanding and perhaps rooted in the history of the organization and the history of kind of how these issues persist throughout higher education as well. So some of the challenges that we heard from folks was the lack of diversity, right? While we've had some folks share that they've noticed an improvement, certainly there's still a long way to go because the perspectives of some others include the lack of diversity, right? We heard feedback that suggested a poorly defined communications in terms of DEIJA. And as James was just mentioning, we have a lot that's going on, but has it been communicated? And is there a perception that there is not a lot going on because folks don't know? right? So again, something to consider and think about from these perspectives that we are hearing. There are exclusionary behaviors that we heard about from folks, and that some of these practices continue to persist. That there is a perceived lack of action and accountability when some of these issues are happening, and the existence and the presence and the lasting impact of historical and structural barriers that were part of the organization at its founding and continue to provide, or at least create structures that make it very, very difficult for some folks in some instances. So getting more into the weeds in terms of the lack of diversity, folks are asking for more voices from historically marginalized communities to be more included in the process, right, in processes that take place. There needs to be more staff hired to ensure DEIJA is being filtered into the organization. And as James has said, we're trying to make it a pillar of the organization, and that's what folks are asking for, and to continue to recruit folks from diverse backgrounds for leadership positions. As far as the communication strategy, folks have given us feedback that they'd like to have leadership at their institution prioritize sharing information regarding all aspects of ACHA. So perhaps greater communication between institutions and ACHA so that it filters down into the staff and to those who need to hear it. And then the call for more transparency as well. And then exclusionary behaviors, people have expressed problematic behaviors that persist within the organization. Doing this work for over 20 years within a multitude of organizations, I will say that this is sadly very common across industries and sectors. So this does still happen. So recognizing that people are still having marginalizing experiences is important to pay attention to, because once, even though you might not think once is a lot, once is too many, right? And if we're moving to making this a pillar of who we are, we have to be sure that we hear what folks are saying to us. As far as historical and structural barriers, folks talking about how the organization continues to kind of operate from a Western medical model and a very Western dominant mindset, and having more openness to different perspectives when it comes to how to best serve the needs of students and campuses and of colleagues and professionals should be considered. That, that if we're in the business of trying to really deliver the best possible professional development for counselors and for folks in that are providing campus health services, we have to be open to all possibilities, right? And to have folks feel like they can be respected and valued through those perspectives that they are sharing. And then members want to really see accountability in action. So when these marginalizing behaviors and instances occur, that there is a response, that there is a communication and an immediate addressing of the issue, so that the folks that are affected and impacted are being taken care of, and the folks that maybe are perpetuating it can receive really important feedback and communication that will only enhance their own professional development, but also more strongly communicate the values of the organization and what it stands for and what the expectations are moving forward. And again, all of these specific areas are covered much more deeply in the full report, which will be available on your website, on ACHA's website. Some of the recommended strategies we came up with for ACHA was to really enhance ACHA across the entire organization and all of the membership, to continue to improve engagement with campus partners, to enhance transparency. This is one of the reasons why we insisted that when the report is done, that it really be shared in its entirety with the membership, because we want full transparency. We want folks to understand what you all are saying about your organization and your membership. To ensure financial accessibility, enhance education and training, particularly when it comes to annual meetings, empower and support the committee, the DEIJA committee, what Padma's going to come on here in just a minute to talk about. That's one thing that really stood out for us, that this is a committee that has a real value and a real potential for impact, but there's not a lot of clarity in terms of the charge of the group. And I think providing more clarity and more robust resources for this committee, they can really be impactful in providing an avenue for members to really communicate and find really real support with that committee and their efforts that they're putting in. Strengthen policy and procedures, address the pushback that might be occurring, because while we are on this call and really interested in finding out what we're doing to support DEIJA, like most organizations in our society, we will have some folks that resist it and are not in favor of these things. So really being aware of that is going to be important in how we move forward. and then developing a communication strategy for DEIJ on a consistent basis so that folks are clear, they understand the direction and where we're going with this. And then lastly, just to some of the priorities that we recommended, some have already begun happening, including this town hall, which was one of our recommendations, but to really make this a focal point of the annual meeting, to provide the leadership with the necessary feedback and assessment data necessary to make sound decisions, and to continue to listen to the membership in order to determine the direction of the organization and the membership. I'll just pause there, stop sharing, and then ask if Padma wants to hop in.
Thank you, Roger.
Absolutely.
Can you all see my screen? Okay. All right. So thank you, James and Roger, for providing that context and kind of where we've been, what the data has told us about how ACHA members are feeling related to this work. And so with that, my section today is really focused on the committee's charges. How do we make meaning of this data? How do we move it forward? And how is it aligned with the strategic plan, and how all of that informs our work moving forward? But before I jump in to really talk about that, I just want to take a moment to recognize and thank our wonderful committee members who have volunteered to take on this big task of talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and accessibility, and really making ACHA a more welcoming and inclusive organization where members can learn, grow, but also feel like they belong. And so I wanted to highlight our members, but also wanted to give a thank you to Roger and his team for all of their great work, the ACHA board for their support, as well as definitely want to give a shout out to the RMHI task force for all of their tremendous work. I know that was a huge undertaking when they did this, and they've really laid a lot of groundwork for us to really build off of and really push this work further. The other thing that I will highlight is that, as James mentioned, our group really came together in August of 2023. And so we are very much in our infancy and very early in our process. So a lot of what I'll be talking about is our plans for the future. But we still have done a number of things since August. So I will highlight that as well. So our charges, so looking a little bit more closely at the work, we have 4 main charges. The first being to work with MSM Global, so Roger and his team, in the development of a 3+ year plan for ACHA to address DEIJA issues. The second being to draft a framework for the work of the committee for the next 2 to 3 years. Third being develop a list of DEIJ committee areas of focus that align with the ACHA strategic plan. And then finally, develop a leadership succession plan, inclusive of length of terms for each position, and an action plan to ensure that leadership continuity in the event of midterm turnover. So as we look at these charges, for us as a committee, we see the second, third, and fourth very much tied to our work with MSM. So we really are going to rely on the data that MSM has collected through the surveys, the focus groups, and the recommendations that they've outlined and areas of focus to inform our work. So that has been part of why we haven't really dive deep into our charges. We wanted to make sure that it was going to be informed by the member data. So while we've been waiting, as MSM has been diligently collecting and analyzing this data over the last few months, we have been involved in a variety of smaller projects. So we did work with MSM to refine the member survey to really think about what are some questions that we should be asking our members, just as a group of folks who have been involved with ACHA. Are there additional things that need to be considered? And we did also share our thoughts via the focus groups. So our group participated in one of those. We helped to draft the ACHA statement on the conflict in Israel and Gaza, with the focus of really recognizing that regardless of personal member views, a lot of our members are going to be supporting students who are impacted and wanting to acknowledge the impact that can have on our well-being as staff members. We also worked with the Data Strategy Task Force to review various ACHA data collection instruments through the DEIJ lens. And so what we were really looking at is how does this instrument, what questions in there can help us look at health equity or health disparities across different institutions or within our membership. What are really great questions that we could apply to other instruments? What are some areas for growth? So that was a really exciting project for us. And lastly, our members have been serving as liaisons to some of the other working groups and task forces. So James mentioned the community engagement group. So we do have a member of our committee sitting on that group. So again, bringing that DEIJA lens. And then we have a member on the framework review task force. So those are ongoing groups that we are kind of liaising with to make sure that that is, again, front and center. So that's a little bit of the work that we've done so far. So now I wanted to jump into where we're planning to go in the future. So, we, with our first charge of working with MSM, Roger previously outlined the different recommended strategic actions. And so we will continue to work with MSM to address some of these. And so what we see as some of the areas that we would be a little bit more directly either leading or supporting are some of these bolded items. So this idea of enhancing transparency. So identifying those opportunities to be more transparent about processes, policies, decisions across ACHA, thinking about enhancing the DEIJ education and training and involvement with the community engagement group, which is affiliated with the program planning committee, to really think about how we can support our members, regardless of their state or institution's political leanings. Also providing the volunteer leader training that James mentioned. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. With the Empower and Support DEIJ committee. So focusing on how the board can empower and support our community. So what are resources that we need? What support we need? What advocacy to really effectively advance the DEIJ work across ACJ? And then identifying policies and procedures that need to be strengthened and really consulting on what can make them more supportive of DEIJ. And I think a good example of that is that data instrument review of kind of highlighting what are some of those more systemic things that can be shifted to better support DEIJ. And then finally, helping to address some of the pushback that Roger mentioned. We recognize that our membership is a microcosm of our country, of the world, and that, there are going to be some concerns around DEIJ work, but how can we think through creative ways to hear, validate, or challenge those voices as needed? So that way we aren't just shutting people down, but trying to understand different standpoints and kind of thinking about what are our values as an organization moving forward and how to align those two. So some of the priorities for this year, the ones that are bolded are some of the areas that we might be a little bit more involved in. So Roger already touched on this, so I won't talk about it too much. So that's the first charge. For the second charge, building out the framework for the work of the committee for the next 2 to 3 years. So as we think about building this framework, we're really approaching it as what's going to help us figure out what we should be involved with and how. And because we also understand that in order to make a lot of sustainable progress on this work, DEIJ can't be limited to just this committee. And so knowing that it is integrated into a lot of other committee, task force, coalition charges, how can we find that balance of what are we fully taking on versus consulting on versus collaborating? And so to that end, we've highlighted some questions that we as the committee want to be considering in terms of what is within our scope as a committee, how do we inform changes to policies and practices, how can we build collaborations across ACHA and who are those collaborations with? And then how do we measure those key performance indicators to kind of think about that scorecard progress report of how are we making progress on this? How do we know that we're not just saying the words, that we are making actionable change? that is going to be sustainable and impactful. And so really this framework, like I said, is our approach to and the scope of DEIJ work at ACJ. So the third charge is to develop a list of DEIJ committee areas of focus that align with the strategic plan. So James has identified some of those the key aspects of the growing the grow DEIJ work. But I think looking at the MSM report and some of the strengths and challenges that were highlighted, we wanted to make sure that that was something that we were pulling into some of the areas of focus. So again, continuing the commitment to DEIJ efforts, but also thinking about how can we inform strategies for increasing that diversity at the leadership level. What are ways that we can increase transparency around different policies and processes across the organization? How can we create these processes for identifying and addressing those exclusionary practices? And then thinking about how do we challenge the systems that are rooted in oppression? You know, they exist all over the world, but then being a model of how we can work towards more equity-minded practices. And then kind of to what Roger was mentioning earlier is developing that culture of accountability for DEIJ within ACJ. So making sure members understand that, yes, this work is happening, but how do we make that more transparent? How do we make sure that it is clear that ACJ is living out our values and what that looks like? And then the fourth charge, this is, again, pretty consistent with a lot of other committees and coalitions, is thinking about that succession plan. Just seeing how there has been progress over time in the history of ACJ, especially since 2007. How can we make sure that this is sustained and transparent? I think that very much leads into what our leadership plan is moving forward. How can we make sure that we are documenting everything that we do and laying out a plan for how this continues? What are iterative next steps in our process? But then beyond that, you know, right now we have a team of 6 members plus our staff and board liaison. But what are different ways we can include other members of ACHA? Also, you know, should there be term limits to participation? Should there be succession plans or things that are kind of built into the fabric of ACHA to make sure that there's sustainability, not just within our work here in the committee, but also across the organization. And really thinking about different ways that folks can be involved. And so that is kind of our intermediate and long-term future plans, but immediate next steps are that we are actually very excited to have an in-person retreat in just a couple of weeks, where we're really going to come together as a committee and dig into these charges, spend some time really brainstorming and thinking about that structure and framework, and then be able to share that with you all. We're also going to be providing a training for ACHA leaders at the annual meeting leadership luncheon. So that happens the day before the opening session. And then we're also, shameless plug here, we're going to be hosting a general session at the annual meeting on that first day, Wednesday at 1:30 p.m., where we're hoping to share a little bit of this framework in the areas of focus and kind of how we see this work moving forward. So with that, I am going to stop sharing. And I think we're going to open it up to some questions.
Great, thank you, Padma. Thank you, Roger. Good. So a lot of things firing on all cylinders. We do have one early question in the Q&A, so I will start there. But please, if you have questions, load them up because we need more than one. Okay. Love that your staff is receiving the DEI certificate from University of South Florida. I too hold that certificate. And as a Jedi, I understand how watered down that program is to appeal to a business and capitalist mindset. I will pause there and say, yes, I agree. I agree. And it is very much it is in the workplace, and they mean a for-profit workplace, clearly. The question I think is directed to me. How are you continuing to encourage staff to develop cultural humility, decenter dominant punitive systems, recenter restorative cultures, to actually create systems that are open to perspectives from across the spectrum of human experience. So I guess my answer to there is ongoing training is really what we try to do. So we get the initial training when a new person joins, and then we're deeply engaged with MSM Global. And so Roger's actually at our next meeting, which is in 2 weeks, is our next all staff meeting. And so we've extended that the time on that to do DEIJA training there at the on an ongoing basis. We can do more. It's tough, as you know. It's tough to find time, but I have prioritized this, and so I continue to prioritize it and putting the funds behind it. Because for me to say, let's just do a group training with each other and figure it out, it's not there. We need consultants. We need people who know more than us. We need to tap the experts, whether it's MSM Global or others, to help us along that staff journey. Because staff is a different beast than membership. It's a how would I describe this? It's two wings of an aircraft, and I'm trying to pilot both. And so, but the question's a good one. Roger, do you want to talk a little bit more about the kind of what you plan for the staff interaction in a couple of weeks? No staff training.
Yeah, so great question, by the way. I was looking at it earlier, and I think it hits on all the things that we've talked about in terms of the aspirations of the organization and where it wants to go, particularly the piece about cultural humility, which, if folks are unfamiliar, is really the concept and idea that organizations and communities cannot stop just at competence. That cultural humility really suggests that the issues themselves require a dedication of a lifetime, really, that in a lifetime, you will not learn everything you need to know about what we need to know about one another, right? Because we are not one another, right? And so we have to have a willingness to engage with one another and hear our experiences and to really dedicate ourselves for the long game when it comes to this. And as far as the training that's coming up for staff, we really put our heads together with ACHA to talk about what would be useful. And I thought, as we put it together, we really came up with a very foundational presentation. We can't assume that folks who will be attending this are all in the same place when it comes to these topics. You might have some folks that show up that are very well versed in these issues and have spent a lot of time engaging in these matters. And you might have others that this might be brand new territory for them. And it's so important when initiating any kind of training or any kind of work when it comes to DEI to meet folks where they're at and to not assume that folks are ready for some information. We have to start at a place so we can have shared language, a shared understanding of the concepts and ideas, so that we can move together in a place that builds trust, that builds learning, and that folks really feel like they are being heard and seen no matter where they are on this journey, so that together and collectively we can move ahead and grow in these areas of learning. And I'll say, as somebody who's done this work for a total of 25 years, we all have something to learn. So if you think you've done it for a long time and you have nothing to learn, we all have something to learn, and we can all benefit from some foundational opportunities as well, so that we can learn where people are at today. So, but that's what we're looking forward to on the 18th, right, James?
Great, thank you, Roger. Looking forward to it, definitely.
Yeah, I think it's on the 18th. Yeah.
The 18th sounds right.
Okay.
And the other thing that I'll add is, when we think about cultural humility and a lot of this DI learning, though it may be applied in our work setting, so much of this work is us as individuals, as human beings, as people, and how that then translates into some of the work. And so I think that's also a distinction to make, is that it's, I think, often easy to kind of compartmentalize and say, this is my work, this is my job. But I think to keep it sustainable and really dive into the work, you also have to be willing to challenge yourself as a human being.
Absolutely. Thank you, Padma. So another question, I think it's the same person, which is great. How was the DEIJA committee chosen, and when are new folks invited to join? So this is a great question, because we launched it. We talked to the RMHI committee leadership last spring, and we're changing it. You're still permanent, but we're making the DEIJA committee. And the chair and the leadership came to us and said, we are burnt out. We have been on this task force and now committee for 3+ years. We've been doing the work, carrying the water here. We want the work to continue. We have nothing against ACHA. We are just burnt out. We've got our day jobs too. And so we issued a call in the summer of 23. And to be honest with you, we were a little bit disappointed at the small number, but then they kept trickling in. And then more people, as word continues to filter out, the group did grow to what you see now, which is 8 or 9 participants. So we're satisfied with it now. It is up to, I think, the chair and the group are they willing to take new people on? at this point, or so Padma, I'll kind of flip it to you. What are your thinking in terms of opening again? I do want to actually, before I throw it to you, Padma, this process is really important in terms of structure and how we put out for task force and how we put out for committees. We've said this many times on the board since my arrival. No more shoulder tapping. No more shoulder tapping. Prior president, past president Jessica Higgs, and current president Dana Tassin have said this from the board so many times, because we have candidates in mind. We want to do this, and we know somebody who would be good for that. That's fine. But first, we put out the public call. Everybody gets the opportunity. And then if you know a candidate who would be good, then you nudge that candidate to respond to the public call, but the call has got to be public. Now, that's for committee. Sometimes task force, it does take huge amount of expertise, and we know who we need to do that. So it's a little bit of a gray area on task force, I'll be honest with you. But committees, for sure, it is always an open call, bolstered by, because look, I don't know about you, but my faith group, they always do a call for committees. It's the people who get asked directly who do stuff. And the faith group and an ACHA type professional society, it's almost the same thing, but you have to put out the open call first. Get people out there, make sure the opportunity is available to everyone. Sorry, I went on a roll there. Sorry, Padma, keep going.
No worries. Yeah. I think definitely, we have not created a structure for how we will do that. I think, we just today, we're starting that conversation of what that might look like. But I think in other groups that I've been involved with, something that we've tried to do intentionally is kind of think about how we can de-identify some, like maybe a statement of interest. So that way we aren't doing that shoulder tapping. What are ways that we can create a little bit more of an equitable system for choosing additional members? How that is more to come, hopefully over the next couple of months, we'll be able to share a little bit more, because I think this is obviously a topic that we know a lot of people have a lot of expertise and passion around. So we'll definitely be thinking about that and trying to make it as equitable as possible.
Thank you, Padma. The next question, I'm not going to read the full question, but the next one I see is about research and understanding how DEIJA issues and concerns. This is tough because we are running against, bumping up against the reality, which is called survey fatigue. Survey fatigue in terms of number of surveys of members, but also survey fatigue in the NCHA specifically, which is student facing, as we know, 300 plus items taking 45 minutes. And this is the era of Amazon rating in one click, Uber driver rating, one click. Did you like it or did you not, right? And students are not usually willing to, uptake is very low, and it's very hard to incentivize students to sit through a 45-minute survey. So we're battling against this idea that continually expanding, which is how we got it to so big. What do we really need to know? And so it is a tough instrument to change, because you also need the continuity to have the longitudinal studies and make it valid that way too. I'm not on the ACHA, NCHA steering committee, but they're the ones who are grappling with these questions. And so it is tougher than it seems like. People want to know more, and I get that, but there's also the reality, like I'm saying, in the field and in the marketplace. So that's kind of a non-answer answer. But I will say it is a tough one. It's a tough nut to crack. How do we make the work appealing to the membership? In particular, the presentations have been kind of one note. So, I kind of flip this to Roger and Padma. I think one thing we can do with the committee when we do have the call, because you'll have a 3-year structure, I think the workload will be clearer. What we're asking you to do will be clearer. And so I think that will make the work more appealing to volunteers. But what else can we do? Padma, Roger, I'd be interested in your ideas here.
I'll defer to Padma as far as the committee and the work of the committee, because I have ideas on how committees can work, but I just definitely want to defer to Padma on this.
So I think I read the question a little differently, is like, how do we make this work more appealing to like the general membership in terms of learning and growing in this area? I think that I think that's a tough one, because I think, again, it goes back to that personal interest, that personal passion, that wanting to learn and grow in that way. And I think sometimes that's appealing to different values that people have, and how can you connect it to what is important to them. In terms of making this work appealing to memberships, in terms of committee, I wanted to highlight a really great suggestion that we got in one of the QAs, is that sometimes being involved in a committee at large or a task force at large can be kind of daunting. These are volunteer positions. We all have day jobs, full-time work that we are doing in addition to what we're doing for ACHA. And so maybe breaking the work up into smaller pieces, so that way there isn't a necessity to attend like multiple meetings every month, where it can be really focused on one particular project or task. So that way more people can get involved. It might be also more of a pipeline to leadership and exposure to different opportunities within ACHA. So thank you to, I think it was Tandra, for offering that suggestion.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is that I think, in a larger sense, I think something that really helps people, hop on to really want to be a part of something like this is clarity of vision, clarity of where we're going, and strength of conviction when it comes to communicating the values of the organization. The hardest part about DEI work for organizations is to really do what I think is wise and important, which is to have your doors open to all perspectives and all folks, and at the same time know what you stand for, and communicate that clearly. And I think that's really, really hard in this day and age. But what we're really talking about in the end here is having organizations and communities become more inclusive, more equitable, and more diverse, right? And more just and more accessible. And if folks really have a deep belief against that, then you cross that bridge. But I think you allow the perspective to be shared, but the train's moving that way, right? And I think that folks, if they have clarity on that, then they'll know where they stand. So I think that helps bring folks in terms of feeling confident that they'll be supported once they jump into these endeavors.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you, Padma. So I saw a question, and we've had this several times. Is it possible to compensate for taking on leadership roles? So if you go back to that chart that I showed you a little while ago, we have 60 different volunteer entities, 63 different volunteer entities. I understand they take time. I understand the volunteer effort. We do thank our volunteers profusely. We try to in the ways that we can. Compensation is actually regulated by a policy that the board adopted long before my arrival here, is that members are not compensated. This is a volunteer-driven organization. We rely on volunteers to drive both the values of the organization, the strategy of the organization, and the work of the organization. The national staff facilitates that work. We're association professionals, but it's really the brain power, the content stuff is really driven by the members and driven by you. We are thankful for it. We're grateful for it. I think when you work with staff, you can feel that we want to help you in so many ways. We really have a culture of saying yes, and sometimes to our own personal detriment. But compensating leaders is at this moment not on the table. And again, that is a board policy, longstanding board policy of ACHA.
There's a follow-up question about board members getting compensated, and my understanding that is also no.
Board members are also not compensated. That's a good question. I didn't clarify that. Thank you.
And there's a question about demographic data collected from members.
Demographic data. Yeah, thank you, Diane, for that question. What demographic data do you collect from your members? Race, ethnicity, gender, and even age band are fairly easy. The answer is we don't collect hardly any of those right now, but we need to. And so it's one of the weaknesses with our current database, which is an outdated database. And so what we are doing is, because of the website overhaul, it's taking 2 years. Yeah, it's huge. It's a huge website. It's going to be a much better website, and that just sneak peek, or just so you know, it's coming out this summer. It's going to roll out. But I bring that up because one major system at a time. The whole website is a major association system. The next system is called the AMS, which is your association management system. That's the membership database, and really looking at expanding this number of demographic questions. Which ones do we need to be must-haves? Which are profile optional, et cetera, so that we can really start pulling in a lot more of these data points. Because in our database, we can mine that data to start finding other patterns and areas of improvement, but also understanding our audience better. We're really at a loss to some of these questions about our own membership, which is a shame because the database has been around for a long time. It's just not a very powerful one.
The thing that I'll add is that with some of the instruments that ACHA uses, like the faculty staff wellbeing survey, there are some demographic pieces there. And I think some of it is also what we found in other contexts is that sometimes with sexual orientation or gender identity, there's sometimes maybe a fear of answering that type of demographic data because not everyone feels safe bringing all of their identities into the workplace. And so I think that is also a fine balance that we have to strike.
Yeah, well stated, Pat, well stated. So we will definitely be contacting the, well, obviously data strategy task force, but also DEIJA committee and other committees where we identify stakeholders when we start developing the formatting for the new AMS system. But that's another year-long project that starts in the fall. We'll start looking at what's available in the marketplace. It's a year-long implementation process. But to answer, that's a long answer to a short question. In a year or two, we will have much better answers for you, Diane, in terms of the demographic makeup of the organization. So looking forward to that when we can get there. So my clock is showing 4 o'clock Eastern. I'm going to thank you all. At a peak I saw of 107 plus participants. So thank you all. Again, this recording will be made available. Thank you, Padma, so much for your work as a volunteer leader at ACHA and for the trainings that you're doing for the volunteer leaders that's coming up. And Roger, thank you for the work you've already done and continue to do. And we'll see you, I think, at in Atlanta as well. So. And then Padma will see you in the office in a few weeks at the DEIJA committee retreat. So
Sounds good. Thanks.
Also, shout out to our volunteer staff who put this together: Katie Wilkins in the education department, Tanya McMillan, our volunteer engagement manager, and of course, Amanda Tickner, our membership director. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for coming out today. Take care. Bye-bye.